everybody. I hope everybody's doing well and is healthy. Welcome to Bio 5B Spring 2020. It's week 1, but that doesn't mean we should start diving into content. So, we're at Supplemental Instruction and we're really trying to do our best to still provide you guys with material and review as we transition to online instruction. So we're going to be uploading videos like this one to our YouTube channel, and these will be linked under the professor's iLearn page under the Supplemental Instruction tab on the left-hand side. In that same area, we're going to be uploading worksheets that we have made based on the material that Professor covers in his lecture videos, and we're also going to be holding office hours. And down in the description box, I'm gonna link the office hour schedule. I'm gonna link the worksheet URL where you can find all the worksheets, and I'm also going to include a sign-in link, and it's really important for you guys to sign into our office hours, sign into watching these videos and stuff. It really shows the amount of students that are using these resources and allows funding for these resources to be available to you guys. So it's really important that you do so. So yeah, that's going to be the three ways that we're going to try to provide material for you. If you have any questions about any material covered in these videos or in the worksheets, again, make sure you go to our office hours or even comment down below with the questions you have. We are going to be making sure that we come on to our YouTube channel periodically and respond to questions and facilitate a good discussion about the material. So make sure you do that, like, comment, and subscribe. We're going to delve right into the material. So this is the first part of Bio 5B. Bio 5B is really about phylogenetics, and to understand phylogenetics, you need to understand evolution. So the course outline is basically going to go through the whole tree of life, the phylogenetic tree of life, and along the way highlight evolutionary concepts and highlight the different organisms and characteristics of the organisms, including anatomy and physiology and stuff. So it's really exciting material, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was all the evolutionary concepts that really allow you to have a good foundation and understanding to understand the tree of life. So first of all, let's start on this end is evolution, right? And we know that phylogenetic trees are based off of the evolutionary relationships that happen between organisms. So it's not over time, it's through evolution. And evolution is the change in characteristics of a species over several generations. So evolution does not happen in one generation. It doesn't happen in one organism. It happens in a whole species over time. And this is because of natural selection, right? So natural selection is the process in which organisms adapt to their environment, and certain adaptations provide an advantage of survival over other organisms in that species. So then that trait is more likely to be found in their offspring. So that concept of having that adaptation isn't developed instantaneously. A lot of times there's a misconception that when we talk about adaptation, we're talking about oh, it's cold, let me grow a coat. That's not what's happening. It's actually that organism already had a coat, so over the other organisms in that species that don't have a coat, they'll probably be more likely to survive the cold, and thus they'll be more likely to produce offspring, and that offspring will have those characteristics because of genetics, right? So why can natural selection happen? And this is because of genetic diversity, right? If all the organisms, let's say we're talking about polar bears with my coat example, if all the polar bears didn't have fur, then there would be no difference in the gene pool for some organisms to have a higher likelihood of survival, right? If all of them were the same, then there would be no selection because every single organism is identical. But that's not the case. We have genetic diversity, so we do have characteristics that in certain environments can provide us with an advantage, right? And that comes from mutations, and if you remember from Bio 5A, it also comes from independent assortment and crossing over and random fertilization, right? Like these are components that cause genetic diversity. So a lot of times mutation has a negative connotation, but we know that genetic mutations in a genotype can refer to phenotypes that can be advantageous. So mutations cause diversity, genetic diversity, which causes natural selection, which causes evolution. So if you kind of organize it into this cause and effect timeline, I want to say, or diagram, then you'll be able to get an overview of what we're talking about. The next thing that the professor covered in lecture was all these terms that have to do with a phylogenetic tree. So this is a phylogenetic tree, right? And we're gonna go through each of the terms and to kind of understand what this is telling us and how we can read it, right? So the first thing, what is a phylogenetic tree? A phylogenetic tree is a diagram that organizes all the different species based on their evolutionary relationship. So it's not over time. They're not saying through this diagram that a turtle came before a bird, or they're not saying that humans came before bats. It's not a timeline. It's simply showing evolutionary relationship, right? So the way you can read this is based off of the nodes and based off of the organisms at the end. So what is a node? A node is any connecting point in this diagram. So there's a node right here, there's a node right here, a node right here, a node right here, and so on, right? And these nodes actually represent a common ancestor. So if we're looking at humans and bats, right? Humans and bats are placed right here, and you can directly follow these two lines up to see they have a common ancestor right here at this specific node. This specific node represents an organism of long time ago that is a ancestor that's or an original form of a human and a bat. So that organism evolved over time to produce a human or a bat. Sorry, I forgot my words. So this organism right here has characteristics, has shared characteristics from the human and the bat. And then if we're going to take a turtle and a human, for example, then we would look for the node that encompasses both organisms, right? So that wouldn't be this node because this node doesn't encompass a turtle. We would have to follow up all the way up until here to find that this is the common ancestor of a turtle and a human, whatever that may be. Okay. So then we have intraspecific variation and interspecific variation. Intraspecific variation is variation within a species. So this would be like within humans. So humans have variation in their eye color, their hair color, their height, their a million other things, right? So there's a lot of variation within species as well. And interspecific variation is talking about the variation between two species. So that would be like the variation between a human and a bat, right? Let's name them. Humans walk on four legs. Humans can't fly, right? There's all these things between two different species that are different. So that's kind of clarifying what the difference between these two are. Then there's sister taxa, and taxa is what you should probably define first. Taxa are basically all of the organisms within like one of these sections of the phylogenetic tree that share a common ancestor. So let's say we're talking about this common ancestor, then everybody in its taxa would be considered one group. So if you're including this common ancestor, then you got to include the turtle, the bird, and the crocs, right? You can't just say birds and crocs. But let's say you're drawing the line of the taxa right here. right? Then you can include this common ancestor, birds and crocs, if that makes sense. Again, if you need clarification on anything I said, come to my office hours and comment down below. I know I'm stumbling on my words sometimes. I really apologize. We're trying to do our best here. Okay, so the next thing from taxa is you need to know what a sister taxa. So sister taxa are two branches that share the common ancestor, right? So this bird is a sister taxa to crocs, and the bird and crocs as a taxa are a sister taxa to turtles. You can even expand that further. So let's say the turtle, bird, crocs taxa is a sister taxa to human bats. Could you say the turtle, bird, crocs taxa is a sister taxa to the tuna? You probably can't, because it's too far off. The sister taxa would be humans and bats. So you're, in this case, in this phylogenetic tree, you're looking for something directly sharing a common ancestor. So turtle, bird, crocs would be human, bat, and human bat sister taxa. And then if you wanted to find a sister taxa to tuna, then you're looking at the node right here, and you're looking at all of this. So frogs, bats, humans, crocs, birds, and turtles. If you have any questions, let me know. And then a clade, right? So a clade is similar to the definition of taxa. You're talking about all the organisms that share a common ancestor. So this can be a clade: crocs, birds, turtles. You can talk about this whole thing as a clade. You can talk about humans and bats as a clade. It's really subjective as to how you define it. So then shared and derived characteristics. Now this is also subjective in terms of how you define your clade, right? If you're defining your clade as this whole thing, then a shared characteristic would be anything that's right here. So here we have some characteristics that are displayed within the phylogenetic tree as to where they showed up. So number 4 is a gizzard. You can see that a gizzard showed up before the common ancestor right here, but wouldn't be found in turtles. So like if we're talking about the turtle, bird, crocs taxa, then number 4 is a derived characteristic, right? Because there is an organism in that clade that doesn't have that characteristic. But if you're talking about, let's say, turtle, bird, crocs, bat, and frog, so everything right from this point on, right? Then you can say a shared characteristic is number 1, right? They all have a tetrapod limb, right? Every single organism you can see has developed a tetrapod limb. Now, can you say that number 2, amniotic sac, is a shared characteristic? You can't if you're referring to the taxa including the frog, because the frog doesn't share that characteristic, right? It started right here. So that would be a derived characteristic of this taxa, right? Number 2, but number 1 would be a shared. Now, if you think about the whole tree, then even number 1 would be derived, because tuna don't have a tetrapod limb. So again, depending on how you define your clade, you can have one characteristic be shared or derived. So the next term we're going to go over is homology versus an analogy or analogy. People say it different ways. Homology is when one characteristic is developed in a result of a common ancestor. So for example, let's talk about flight, right? So you have flight. So birds are animals that fly and bats are animals that fly. They both can fly, and that's a common characteristic. But can you say it's homologous? You can't, because that characteristic developed independently. Crocodiles don't fly. So that's not a shared characteristic from this ancestor. That's just a characteristic of the bird. Versus here, you can see that, or also here, you can see that a bat, similar to a human that can't fly, doesn't share that characteristic from the original ancestor. It developed it later on. So that would be an analogous characteristic, versus a homologous characteristic would be something that developed from a common ancestor. So between humans and bats, right, both are mammals, so that was in the common ancestor, and that trait is present because of that common ancestor. So even within birds, let's say this was broken up into 2 different type of birds, like a bluebird and a pigeon, right? Both can fly, and both can fly because they have a common bird ancestor. So think of other examples. There's several in your lecture slides as well. The next definition that you need to know is the outgroup and the ingroup. So again, this is subjective as to what you define as your outgroup, but for a purpose of an example, let's define everything from frog, bat, human, crocs, bird, turtle as our in-group. Then our out-group would be the tuna, right? Because it doesn't share this common ancestor that this one has. So we're referring to this clade right here, the turtle, bird, crocs. And then we can say the bird and crocs are an in-group, and the out-group is the turtle. So the next organism that also shares a common ancestor would be considered your out-group. And this is a really simple phylogenetic tree. It only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 organisms on it. But as you go to the course, you'll get into the double digits, maybe even triple digits of organisms that you need to know. So understanding these terms is really important in general. So the last thing I'm going to go over is the taxonomy, and there's a really nice mnemonic to help you remember it. It's called Dear King Philip Came Over for Good Spaghetti. So this helps you remind the order of the taxonomic system. So you start with domain. So you have 3 different domains, right? We have archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Yes, that was right. Then you have different kingdoms like an animal kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So as you go down this list, you're becoming more specific in terms of the grouping of the different organisms. So we are Homo, which is our genus, sapiens, right? So that is a general scientific naming system for different species. You go genus and then species, but it's also important to know and understand how they fall into the higher up hierarchical groups. So this is the last bit of information I'm going to cover for this section. Let me know if you have any questions. Don't forget to sign in, and definitely come to our office hours to clear anything up. Thank you for watching. Bye.